It's a glittering audience, and the bond that they share is that they love music.
He built the careers of Whitney Houston, Bruce Springsteen, Alicia Keys, and Aretha Franklin. For more than 5 decades, Clive Davis wasn't just a music executive. He was the music industry, the man behind the sound, the name behind the names. But now, as federal investigators close on a world he helped create, a different story is beginning to surface, one that involves secret meetings, government informants, private prison contracts, and a silence so deep that even the most powerful institutions in entertainment refuse to break it. So, what did they find in Clive Davis's world? And why is the question being asked at all, right now in 2025? If you've been following the Sean Combs case, you already know things have gotten bigger than one man. Stay with us, because this story goes much further than most people realize. That in June 2025, Clive Davis received a Legacy Award at the Apollo Theater, one of the most celebrated venues in Black American music history. It was a moment of validation, a standing ovation for a career that spanned decades and reshaped popular culture. He smiled, the crowd applauded, and the cameras caught every second of it. Meanwhile, just a few miles from the glittering ceremony, the legal case against Sean Diddy Combs was moving toward sentencing. Federal prosecutors were pushing for a 50-year prison term. Diddy had already spent months in federal detention. The charges were serious: sex trafficking, racketeering, coercion. And the names connected to his case were growing. That contrast. One man celebrated at the Apollo, another awaiting sentencing in a federal facility, is what started people asking questions. Because Clive Davis and Sean Combs weren't strangers. Davis invested $15 million into Bad Boy Records in the mid-1990s. At the very moment Bad Boy was becoming one of the most influential labels in hip-hop history. Their professional relationship was long, documented, and significant. So why was Combs facing consequences while Davis accepted awards? That question opened a door. And behind that door were allegations that had been circulating for years, largely ignored, largely dismissed, but now impossible to separate from a federal investigation that was already pulling back the curtain on how power worked in the music industry. It's important to say this clearly. None of what follows has been proven in court. Davis's representatives have denied the allegations. But what's harder to deny is that the questions exist and that major institutions, including Universal Music Group and Interscope Records, have remained completely silent as those questions get louder. To understand why any of this matters, you have to understand who Clive Davis actually is. Born in Brooklyn, New York in 1932, Davis grew up in a working-class Jewish household. Both of his parents died before he reached adulthood. His father from a heart attack when Davis was just 10 years old, his mother from cancer a few years later. He was raised by relatives moved between homes and found stability through academic achievement. He earned a scholarship to New York University, then went on to Harvard Law School, graduating with honors. He didn't start in music. He started in law. His first job in the industry was as a legal counsel for Columbia Records in 1960, a practical, business-minded entry into a world that would eventually define him. But it didn't take long for Davis to realize that his talent wasn't just reading contracts. It was identifying artists, hearing something in a voice, in a melody, in a moment, and knowing, before anyone else did, that it would matter. By 1967, he had become president of Columbia Records. He was 35 years old. What followed was a career unlike almost any other in recorded music. Davis signed or developed Janis Joplin, Billy Joel, Aerosmith, Earth, Wind & Fire, and Barry Manilow. When he was controversially let go from Columbia in 1973, dismissed over expense account irregularities, a moment that briefly threatened to derail everything, he didn't fade. He founded Arista Records. And at Arista, he built something even bigger. It was Davis who discovered Whitney Houston. He signed her at 19. He shaped her image, chose her songs, and guided her through a career that would produce some of the best-selling albums in history. Their relationship was described as one of the most significant artist-executive partnerships in popular music. When Houston died in 2012, Davis spoke at her funeral. He cried. The grief appeared genuine. He also signed Aretha Franklin, Santana, TLC, Usher, and Alicia Keys. He co-founded J Records and later Jive Records. He held senior roles at RCA and Sony BMG. He received the Grammy Trustees Award. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He wrote a best-selling memoir. By any conventional measure, Clive Davis was exactly what the Legacy Award suggested, a living institution. But institutions, as it turns out, can have shadows. And in 2025, with federal investigators examining the business practices of the music industry more closely than they had in decades, some of those shadows were beginning to take shape. The story that a radio host named Larry Gators told, first dismissed as fringe conspiracy, later impossible to ignore, began at a mansion in Beverly Hills. It began in 1995, and it allegedly involved not just Clive Davis, but figures from the CIA, the FBI, and the private prison industry. That story, and whether any part of it is true, is where this gets complicated. Larry Gators is a radio host. He's not an investigative journalist. He's not a federal prosecutor. He's not a former label executive with documents to back up his claims. He's a voice on the radio who, several years ago, made a claim that most people in the mainstream music press refuse to take seriously. But the claim itself has not gone away. According to Gators, in 1995, a private meeting took place at Clive Davis's Beverly Hills mansion. The people allegedly in attendance were not just music executives. They included individuals with ties to the CIA and FBI, and they included representatives from the private prison industry. Specifically, companies that had financial stakes in the growing incarceration economy of the 1990s. The alleged purpose of this meeting, according to Gators, was to discuss hip-hop, specifically to discuss how hip-hop could be shaped, pushed in a direction that emphasized violence, crime, and reckless behavior, in a way that would increase incarceration rates among young black men. More incarceration meant more revenue for private prisons. And the music, in this theory, was the mechanism. It sounds extreme. It sounds like the kind of thing you find on a late-night internet forum, not in a serious conversation about the music industry. And that's exactly how most outlets treated it when the claims first circulated. But then a few things happened. First, an anonymous letter began circulating in 2012, posted online and shared widely, that appeared to corroborate parts of Gators' account. The letter, written by someone claiming to be a former music industry executive, described attending a similar meeting in the mid-1990s. The writer claimed they were told that the next generation of music would be deliberately steered toward content that glorified incarceration, and that certain executives had already agreed to give prison industry investors priority distribution rights in exchange for financial backing. The letter was never verified. Its author was never identified, and many analysts dismissed it as fabricated, but it kept circulating. And it kept finding new audiences every time something else happened in the music industry to make people suspicious of the people at the top. The second layer of the allegation involved the origins of gangster rap itself, and specifically the story of Priority Records and NWA. NWA emerged from Compton, California in the late 1980s with a sound that was genuinely radical. Straight Outta Compton wasn't manufactured controversy. It was anger from a community that had been ignored, surveilled, and brutalized by law enforcement. The music was a response to real conditions. But the question some researchers and critics have raised over the years is, who benefited from the commercialization of that anger? And how much of the genre's subsequent development was organic versus directed? Priority Records, the label that distributed NWA, had financial backing that critics have described as murky. Some of the money that flowed into Priority, and later into other labels distributing gangster rap, allegedly came from investors whose other financial interests included private detention facilities. None of this is confirmed. None of it has been litigated. But the pattern, the idea that the most commercially successful version of Black Anger was also the version that served certain financial interests, has persisted as a framework for interpreting what happened to hip-hop in the 1990s. And it connects in the minds of those who believe Gators' account directly to Clive Davis, because Davis was at the center of the industry during that same period. His investment in Bad Boy Records in the mid-1990s put him in direct business with a man who was by then one of the most powerful figures in hip-hop. The third voice in this story is Suge Knight, and he is, to put it gently, not a neutral witness. Knight, the founder of Death Row Records, is currently serving a 28-year prison sentence for voluntary manslaughter. He has every reason to be bitter. He has every reason to try to shift attention from himself onto others, and his claim should be understood in that context. But from prison, Knight has made specific accusations. He has claimed that certain executives in the music industry, including those connected to Bad Boy Records, participated in degrading initiation rituals for new artists. He has claimed that these practices were known, protected, and enabled by people at the very top of the industry. And he has implied that the reason certain figures have never faced consequences is that they have relationships with law enforcement and government agencies that shield them. Knight named no one more specifically than Combs in his claims. But the framing, the idea that power in the music industry was connected to power in government, mapped directly onto the Gators' allegations about the 1995 meeting. Again, unproven. Again, from a source with serious credibility problems. But the accumulation of these voices, Gators, the anonymous letter writer, Knight, create a narrative that by 2024 and 2025 had enough circulation to be impossible to simply dismiss. What makes the Clive Davis question specifically interesting, rather than just another piece of music industry conspiracy folklore, is a documented proximity to Combs. Davis's $15 million investment in Bad Boy Records was not a small or casual transaction. It was a significant financial commitment made at a moment when Bad Boy was both enormously profitable and increasingly controversial. The label's roster included the notorious B.I.G., the beef with Death Row Records, which would contribute to the deaths of both Biggie and Tupac Shakur, was already building. Davis knew the landscape. He was one of the most experienced figures in the business. His decision to invest wasn't naive. And yet, as Combs' legal troubles mounted, first the civil lawsuits, then the federal indictment, then the detention, Davis's name remained largely absent from coverage. He gave interviews. He attended events. He accepted awards. When Combs' former properties were searched by federal agents, and when the scope of the investigation began to expand, the question of who else might be scrutinized became more pressing. Davis has not been charged with anything. He has not been named as a subject of the federal investigation. His representatives have denied that any allegations against him have merit, but his silence on Combs and the industry's broader silence has not gone unnoticed. Here's what we know. In 2024, federal agents raided properties connected to Sean Combs in both Miami and Los Angeles. The searches were extensive. Agents reportedly removed electronics, documents, and other materials. The scope of what they were looking for and what they found has only been partially disclosed through court filings. The federal charges against Combs include sex trafficking by force, fraud and coercion, and racketeering conspiracy. Prosecutors described a pattern of behavior that stretched across decades. They described a network of people, employees, associates, and fixers who allegedly helped maintain the operation and protect Combs from accountability. What has not been disclosed publicly is the full list of individuals that federal investigators have spoken with, or the names that may have surfaced during the investigation as potential witnesses, associates, or persons of interest. That ambiguity is where Clive Davis's name re-entered public conversation, because the federal investigation into Combs is not, at its core, just about Combs. It's about an ecosystem. It's about the conditions that allowed certain behaviors to persist for decades without consequence. It's about who knew, who enabled, and who protected. And when you ask those questions about the music industry, when you start pulling on threads about power and accountability, Clive Davis is one of the names you eventually reach, not because of any charge or finding, but because of his position, because of his proximity, because of what his investment in Bad Boy represented in terms of his relationship with Combs and with the world Combs built. Davis is 92 years old. He is, by all accounts, still active and engaged. His memoir, The Soundtrack of My Life, describes a man who was deeply self-aware about his legacy and deeply invested in how history would record his contributions. That investment in legacy is now intersecting with a moment in history that is asking uncomfortable questions about the legacy of the entire industry. Let's go back to June 2025, back to the Apollo Theater, back to the Legacy Award. There's something almost cinematic about the timing. In the same month that Combs' sentencing was moving forward, in the same weeks that federal investigators were still working through evidence gathered from his properties, Clive Davis was on a stage in Harlem, being honored. The people in that room knew what was happening with Combs. The executives in the front rows knew about the federal case. They knew about the civil suits that had preceded it. They knew about the allegations. And they applauded. That's not by itself evidence of anything. Awards happen on complicated timelines. Institutions are often slow to respond to evolving situations. And Davis had not been charged with anything. But the image, the man who invested $15 million in Bad Boy Records, standing under the lights at the Apollo, receiving a legacy award while his former business partner sat in federal detention, is difficult to look at without asking questions. It is the kind of image that sticks. And it is the kind of image that, for the audience that has followed this story, carries emotional weight that goes beyond the specific legal facts. It speaks to something that a lot of people have felt about the music industry for a long time, that consequence and accountability are unevenly distributed, that certain people face the full force of the system, and certain people do not. Whether that feeling maps onto the actual facts of the Clive Davis situation remains to be seen. But the feeling is real, and it's driving the conversation. Here is where things stand. The federal case against Combs is ongoing. A sentencing has been anticipated. But the outcome of cooperation discussions, whether Combs will provide information to investigators in exchange for consideration, could reshape what becomes public. If Combs cooperates, the names he might offer, the meetings he might describe, the relationships he might detail, any of that could surface in ways that bring new scrutiny to figures who currently operate in the background of this story. If Combs does not cooperate, the investigation's reach may remain narrower. The allegations against Davis, the Gators meeting, the anonymous letter, the Suge Knight accusations, may remain exactly what they are now, improving claims circulating at the edge of public discourse, never confirmed, never fully refuted. Universal Music Group has not commented on the allegations. Interscope Records has not commented. The major institutions of the music industry, the ones with the most access to records and relationships in history, have remained silent. That silence means something. It doesn't prove anything, but it means something, and in the absence of definitive answers, the questions keep moving. Clive Davis built something real. The artists whose careers he shaped, the voices he helped the world hear. That is not a small thing. Whitney Houston's voice, Aretha Franklin's power, Alicia Keys' depth, those legacies are genuine, and they are part of what he made possible. But the music industry, like every industry built on power and money and access, has always had rooms that the public doesn't see, meetings that don't get recorded, decisions that don't get explained. And the question of what happens in those rooms, of who benefits and who pays the price, is a question that doesn't go away just because the people involved will prefer it to. Clive Davis is 92 years old. He may never be charged with anything. The allegations against him may remain exactly that, allegations, circulating forever in the space between suspicion and proof. But the federal investigation into the music industry's inner workings is not finished, and the silence from the people who know the most is not, as they might hope, the same as innocence. It's just waiting. If you made it this far, you already know the story is bigger than any one person. So here's the real question. When power and accountability collide in an industry this large, does the truth eventually come out, or does legacy always win? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. There's a lot more where this came from.